The governor extends her stay-at-home order until May 28th, but Republican leaders are tired of her bypass and they're taking her to court. And there are two kinds of health, physical and fiscal. How do we balance the two? Today is Sunday, May 10th, 2020. It's Mother's Day, and this is Flashpoint. Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. A very happy Mother's Day, though certainly the oddest Mother's Day in memory. A lot of people were looking forward to this coming Thursday when we hoped the stay-at-home order would be done, and while the virus crisis wouldn't be over, we would feel a palpable sense of progress. But the playing field got a little longer on Thursday when the governor announced she is tacking on another 14 days, which stretches the order out past Memorial Day. None of this will play well with those who've been protesting in Lansing and online, and the governor's approach continues to win her no fans among Republican leaders at the state capitol. They have sued the governor for unilaterally extending her emergency powers. Is this a fight over the governor's actions or over the authority through which she's making them? In a minute, we're going to talk with the Speaker of the House, Lee Chatfield, about that. And then we're going to talk over this line we're trying to walk between a health catastrophe and an economic one. Patience is wearing thin. How do we hold it all together? It's today on Flashpoint. Well, Michigan is a bit of a house divided among itself, at least in Lansing right now, as the state legislature is suing its own governor. Let's talk about that with the Speaker of the Michigan House, Lee Chatfield. Speaker, thanks you so much for your time. It's great to have you here this morning. I guess as we look forward, we now know that the oral arguments are set for this coming Friday. It's been set for May 15th. I guess my first question is, do you have more of a problem with the fact that the governor is doing this unilaterally, the way she's doing it, or do you have a problem with what she's doing?
Well, good morning, Devin. It is a pleasure to be on the show. I appreciate you having me. You know, I think in a pandemic, what we've done in times past as a country, as a state, is we've come together and we've worked together. I think our country's strength is in our unity. And we offered that partnership to the governor last week, and she rejected it. We offered cooperation, but instead she chose the courts. And I think it was a disappointing time for our state because it was a missed opportunity. And we would like to return to the normal democratic process where we are working together, we're all on the same page, we're rolling up our sleeves for the good of the people of our state. Now, I believe the governor has the best of intentions in the decisions that she's making. I understand she's in a difficult position, and no manual was given to her or to the president with how to deal with this pandemic. Yeah. But when we work together, we're stronger, and we think that the laws still need to be followed, and our Constitution still needs to be followed, even while we are in a pandemic.
Well, a lot of legal experts right now seem to be saying that, the legislature is a little bit out of luck because the structure of our form of government in this state just leaves the governor with a great deal of strength that can kind of sidestep the legislature. I think it's at best 50-50. The legal experts that I'm reading, I know your own attorneys are advising you perhaps otherwise, but is it just the fact that you might need structural changes? For instance, getting rid of one of these, either the 1976 law, the 1945 law, rather than being able to succeed on the way the law stands right now?
Well, I think the law is very clear in Michigan, Devin, that in order for a state of emergency to be extended, it requires legislative approval. As a matter of fact, that's why the governor asked for it, because it's what the law requires. Now, we extended it the first time. We understood the governor was in the best position to make many of these decisions. We extended it, and when we got to that final extension, and she asked for an extension from the legislature, we extended our hand and said, we will extend it. We'll keep the state of emergency in place if you can at least assure us that we will, through the democratic process, at least decide what the stay-at-home order looks like. You see in our state, Devin, across the entire state in every single corner, our regions have been impacted in different ways. Yeah. What we believe is that our strategy needs to recognize that a one-size-fits-all approach is not the right call. And could you imagine a scenario, Devin, where we told every hospital system, every healthcare system, we're going to give you the same PPE, the same resources, the same funding to fight COVID-19. Well, that would be absurd because different regions need more of it, and we should provide that. But if we're going to regionalize our relief efforts, we should also regionalize our policies. And we wanted to work together with the governor. I think the law is clear. And for the first time in our state's history, the legislature chose not to extend it. And the governor said, I'm going it alone. I no longer need your help. Well, and whether it's the president, Devin, or the governor, We're all in this together. The president needs Congress, just like the governor needs the legislature.
Well, you now have to wait almost a week here, and by the time that this gets heard, the oral arguments, you'll be almost at 2 weeks since you filed it, a week and a half at least. Why didn't you ask for an injunction? Why didn't you ask for immediate relief from the courts?
Well, we thought this was the best way to move forward, Devin, and I will let our attorneys make some of those arguments in court. Obviously, as it's pending litigation right now, so I won't necessarily give all the details. But we thought this was the necessary step, and nobody wanted to be here. Nobody wanted to fight this in the courts. No one wants to have this go through a legal battle. But we do have 3 co-equal branches of government here in our state. And it's important in times of pandemics that that structure is upheld, that it is maintained. And now all 3 are going to be involved. The governor's in a tough spot. We want to partner with her. We want to help her. I think she's got the best of intentions, but we're strongest when we're working together and following our Constitution, and I don't think we are right now.
Let me ask you this. The governor says that she is just listening to scientists and epidemiologists. Who are you listening to?
Well, we've been talking to a lot of people, Devin, and I'll tell you this, we've been talking to nearly 10 million people in our state, and many of the same people that she's talking to, whether it's the people who are running her, potential business reopening plan in Detroit or her chief medical officer. I'm in communication with them. I'm in communication with the governor as well. But we need the people to be at the table, and the legislature is the people's voice. But let me push back a little bit on that, Devin, as well. When someone says they're simply following data and science, you see, the entire country right now is in a national emergency. We're seeing states handle this in different ways. One of my main requests to the governor over the last month is to adopt the most updated federal standards, as many states have, because they're science-based. Yet Michigan has refused to do many of those very important steps, and she's refused to implement some of the more reasonable changes that we have been asking. So I actually think Michigan is an outlier in that we're not following data. If public safety is our #1 goal, Devin, the next logical question needs to be, what can we do safely? But you see, we say safety is our #1 goal, so let's determine what jobs are essential in our state. I think that's the wrong strategy, because any job that puts food on our table is essential. And we need to approach it from that perspective. And if we do now, we'll save ourselves a lot of trouble down the road as a state.
The protests that we've watched break out around Lansing, nobody, I think, questions anybody's right to dissent in America. But I'm curious as to how you feel about the way that these have been carried out, the way that they've spread out all over the world as people watch people packing guns, marching, and in some cases trying to get into the state capitol building.
Well, there's nothing more American, obviously, Devin, than people coming and protesting and explaining their frustrations. There's people in our state right now who are hurting. There are families who have had their livelihoods taken away. Some are being told that they can't work a job and take care of their loved ones, even when it can be done safely. So many people are coming to the Capitol to protest. Now, there have been some bad actors, in my opinion, at these protests. There should never be intimidation. Some of the signs that I've seen on the lawn they're out of order, they are wrong. And quite frankly, they're despicable. And I think it's important that we encourage people, if you're going to come and protest, if you're going to come and make your voice heard here at the state capitol, do so in a safe way, do it smartly without intimidation. We need to hear from the people. But unfortunately, there have been a couple bad actors that I believe cast a broad brush over all the protesters, where everyone thinks everyone was acting in a disorderly way. So we need to hear from the people, but we encourage people to do it in a safe way, responsibly. And unfortunately, we haven't seen that all the time here in our state and around the country.
Well, it's been pointed out that nobody can shoot the virus. So the presence of guns, first off, I'm curious as to what you think exactly those were supposed to mean or say, but I also want to know if you think people should be allowed to take a gun into the state capitol.
Well, obviously people have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. It was important enough that the framers of our Constitution for our country put it in the Second Amendment. It's Article 1, Section 6 in our Michigan Constitution, the right to keep and bear arms. People have a right to do that. This is the people's house. It's the people's chamber. I don't want to say you have a constitutional right to assemble and a constitutional right to protest, and you have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms, but you don't have a constitutional right to do both at the same time. I think we have to be very careful about that. However, Devin, here in our Michigan Capitol today, we've had the same laws regarding firearms that we've always had. Right? We do allow concealed carry. Open carry is allowed.
Well, you know that some of your colleagues were feeling very intimidated and threatened by what they saw around them.
I think some of the behavior of those that were carrying firearms was out of line. I will be very honest with you about that. There should never be any sense of intimidation when you're carrying a firearm, but we just need to be careful, even in a pandemic, before we say we're just going to simply take away everyone's rights to have guns here in the Capitol. People need to be safe. People need to exercise their constitutional rights responsibly. That's what I'm calling on people to do. And as Speaker, I want to do everything I can to ensure people here in the chamber are kept safe. I applaud the Michigan State Police. I applaud our House sergeants and the Senate sergeants who did an incredible job at doing the absolute best that they could to their ability to maintain order. And I think, the protests, they're legal. People can do it. I just encourage people to be responsible when they come to Michigan's Capitol.
You would fight then any efforts, though, to change the ability to carry guns to the Capitol?
Constitutional rights are very important to me, Devin.
Yep.
And I think it's important that we honor those and respect those because the people give us our Constitution. I took an oath to uphold the Constitution, even whether I agree with it or not, as it pertains to many areas. And we just have to be careful. There's been a lot of talk, Devin, about who's essential, what's essential.
Yeah.
You know what? Today, the Constitution is still essential. And I think we can prioritize public health and take COVID-19 very seriously, yet be more reasonable in our approach. That's what we're asking of the governor. Let's take it seriously, but let's also look to restore livelihoods when it can be done safely and protect people's freedoms. We can find that balance, Devin. If we work together, we can find that balance.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for your time this morning. We will await what happens with the opening oral arguments on your lawsuit coming up this week. Thank you very much for the time this morning, and stay safe.
Thank you, Devin. Appreciate it.
You bet. Back with more in just a minute. We'll talk about fiscal health versus physical health. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
In these uncertain times, we are here for you. Beaumont is leading Michigan through the COVID-19 crisis, and we will help lead the way out. Our expert doctors and caregivers have created a secure environment so you can feel safe coming to us for care. If you have life-threatening symptoms, go to one of our emergency centers. If your surgery was postponed, call your doctor. They're ready to help. I can assure you, Beaumont is safe and ready to serve you.
With Michigan weather being so unpredictable, spend tax returns and profit-sharing checks where it matters most, your home. Call Ace & Sons today.
Don't go to the wrong place. Leave your insulation to Ace.
The stories that really keep me going are the ones that showcase the best of who we are as Detroiters. So many of you reached out to us asking how you can help. Well, one thing we can do is to make sure our frontline workers aren't saving lives on an empty stomach. It seems so simple, but it's so meaningful. That's why Food for Frontline is helping keep our essential workers fed and fighting for our communities. You can donate now at clickondetroit.com/frontline and stay with Local 4 for the moments that matter.
All right, welcome back. Let's talk about balancing our personal freedoms with public health issues and balancing physical health with fiscal health. Got a great group to talk about that this morning. Joined by, as we will go clockwise here from the upper left, you see Stephen Henderson from Detroit Today on WDET. Moving to the right from there, Michael Stellini, who's been with us before, medical ethicist from Wayne State University. Below him is Nolan Fenley, editorial page editor of the Detroit News, and Candace Miller, Public Works Director from Macomb County, and of course before that, a member of the U.S. Congress. And Candace, let me start with you. I'm curious as to how you think right now we should be weighing these many sort of yearnings that we have to want to stay healthy, to worry about public health, but at the same time respect, as we always have in America, people's right to do as they want and do as they choose.
Well, it certainly is the most challenging experiment or experience, I should say, that any of us have ever been through. And, you know, here in Southeast Michigan, we're sort of in the vortex of it. I mean, besides New York and New Jersey, it's Michigan that have all of these deaths, the horrific numbers that have come out of the city. And, you know, I'm in Macomb County, and it's horrifying what is happening. But it is, and I think it's difficult for us. I mean, people, particularly Americans, I mean, we're an independent lot here. We're not used to being stuck at home and we can't do this and we can't do that. Yeah. Everything's closed. So it really is a difficult thing, but I do think hats off, because really, as we see the numbers plateau, as we see them on the decline now, it is quite incredible what has happened with personal behavior and how people have taken, most people have taken all these decrees very seriously, whether they're coming from Washington or here in Michigan, and thinking about how we have to be so careful when we're living so that we don't contract this terrible, terrible virus.
It's really been something to watch as people have, for the most part, yes, followed along. Michael Stellini, though, I'm curious, it would be one thing to say to people, look, I want to go out, and if I get the disease, then I get the disease. I'm willing to take that risk. The trouble is, it's not so much you getting it as you may be unwittingly passing it on to other people. That kind of changes this calculus a little, doesn't it?
Exactly. Folks who have looked at this kind of thing in the past have shown, as Candace said, that most Americans are willing to give up some liberty for the good of everyone. And the idea that we could harm somebody else by our behavior, not just ourselves, is really the case. And we have a moral obligation that we don't harm others, and that's really what justifies the restricting liberties. Most people get that. And historically they have throughout our history during different times, Civil War, forward, et cetera. We've had to do that. So yes, absolutely. When we could harm other people by our behavior, it's not just taking risk for ourselves. Yeah. And we have an obligation not to do that.
Stephen, I think it was kind of predictable that we would reach a panic room kind of stage in this where people were just, that willing to go along for a long point, but certainly we could expect a breaking point was coming. And I think for a lot of people, certainly Republican leadership in the legislature, those who've been marching on Lansing, we're at it. We're there.
People are restless, and I think people are anxious, not just about public health, but also their economic state. You've got a lot of people, individuals, who are suffering on two fronts, right? Their public health is at risk, but their financial well-being is also at risk. I think we are not at the breaking point so much as a people. Every poll that I see says that people are more concerned that a relaxation of the restrictions will cause another outbreak than they are about getting back to life as quote unquote normal. That doesn't mean people don't care about economics, but it means that their priorities are on public health, which is where we need the government's priorities to be. I'm reminded in the conversation that's going on in Lansing now of the recent experience we had with Flint, where money and economic concerns were put ahead of public health. And we've seen what the consequences of that look like. I think we have different leadership now that's making different decisions. And I think the people of Michigan chose that, knowing that that these would be the kinds of priorities this governor would choose.
Well, Nolan, your editorial page is taking great issue right now, though, with the way the governor is making her decisions. I'll ask you the same question I asked Lee Chatfield either. Is it more the decisions that she's making or the way that she's arriving at them?
I think the issue here is not enough common sense in the decisions. There's some things, I think as a whole, I agree with Steve, the people know that this is necessary and agree that there are some sorts of restrictions, some level of restrictions that have to be put in place, but there seems to be a stubbornness at work here, an unwilling to weigh the different situations and come and instead of a one size solution, add some flexibility. I'm thinking about the rural hospitals who are about to go under, many of them, and yet they've had no COVID patients, but they can't do any other procedures. And so you've got a number of rural hospitals who face bankruptcy. What's that going to do to the long-term health of our state? So I think it's the sort of broad brush she's used here and her refusal to in any way be flexible. I don't think people are really sitting around for the most part saying, I can do whatever I want, I got rights. I think there's a lot of despair out there, a lot of desperation as people are seeing their small businesses go down, their jobs lost, and starting to really worry now about their long-term future. how they're going to support their families, what they're going to do for work when this is over.
Candace, we know we've had enough cases in Macomb County, but in your old congressional district, you get up to Huron County, Sanilac County, not as much. Should we be approaching this in a regional way, or are we too connected to do that?
Well, first of all, let me say I've been very hesitant to second guess either the president or our governor. I mean, I'm not sitting in their shoes. None of us are, right? These are incredibly difficult choices that they are trying to make. And they're trying to meld, I think, you know, the devastation from a health standpoint, as well as the economic devastation that's out there. But if I were to give any advice to our governor, I would say that I think a little bit more of a regional approach could be helpful. Because as you say, I mean, you can go up to Huron County and I don't know how many cases are up there, but a handful. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there are so many areas in the Upper Peninsula, et cetera. And as Nolan has just said, really, I think the thing that is of huge concern right now is the hospitals, the rural hospitals. And I think we all share that concern. I actually sit on the board of McLaren Macomb. You know, we're a big hospital and a big chain. And certainly here in Macomb, we have a big presence. But I'll tell you, we're hemorrhaging cash, just like all the hospitals are, because no one's wanting to come into the emergency room. Yeah. Safe now to come in. But in some of these rural counties, if they lose their hospital, that is really a huge concern. I think we really need to focus on that. Healthcare, yes, we're really focused on healthcare. Let's make sure that we have it long-term for everybody in Michigan.
Michael, we talked about this on the program last week. I think many Americans have been dumbfounded to see how reliant many of our hospitals and healthcare systems are on what we are being termed elective procedures.
Right. So it is true, actually, that a lot of hospitals do make a fair amount of money out of doing elective things like joint replacements, for example, and those have really been put on hold. The problem is the public's perception about, you know, what's elective has sort of spilled over into people going to the emergency department, you know, when they should, because of things like heart problems, lung problems that aren't, you know, emphysema and things like that. So so we are seeing a little bit of lifting of the restrictions, and I know in Detroit and probably everywhere now they're starting to do more elective things with precautions. That's starting, and you've seen public service announcements, and we're doing it with our own patients. You know, come into the hospital if you're sick. We're safe. We know what we're doing, and we'll protect you. And you need to get your other things taken care of. It's disturbing that we're seeing, you know, paramedics showing up and people already dead in their homes soon enough. So if we could spread that message that, yes, you should take care of yourself, you should come in if you need to, that'd really be important.
It's going to be hard to figure out, calculate what that part of this cost has been. Stephen, back to the governor for just a minute. There's an art, if you're an elected leader, to making other people do what you want them to and convincing them that it was their idea. And she's decided almost defiantly and very pointedly to kind of go it alone here rather than trying to bring the legislative leadership along with her. Is that the right approach, or is she missing an opportunity here because those Republican leaders represent a lot of people too?
They do, and I guess I would put it another way. I mean, the governor has been absolutely inclusive of everybody in the discussions about how this is supposed to go. She's got public health officials, she's got business leaders, and the leadership of the legislature has been invited to all of those discussions. What they are upset about is not that they haven't been in the discussion. What they're upset about is that the discussion doesn't go their way and that they've left and that they can't make her do something different. I think some of the messaging around this has been more divisive perhaps than it needed to be. I think the administration has done some things that probably exacerbated the tensions between the executive and the legislative branch here. But I don't think the legislative branch has been shut out. I think that is a false narrative. They have chosen not to participate in a process that they don't control. and that's a very different dynamic.
Now, I can see Nolan shaking his head through a number of the things you just said. Nolan, I only got about 30 seconds left. Go ahead, though.
Because that's just not true. I mean, she went weeks without talking to Mike Shirkey. She's from the beginning. This governor has preferred to work around the legislature rather than do the hard work of trying to build consensus. The Constitution doesn't go away just because of there's a crisis, just because there's an emergency. You need that oversight, and you need the representative branch to have its voice. Imagine if Donald Trump had said, well, I'm setting aside Congress. I'm not going to run anything I do by Congress. I'm going to make the law and enforce law and sign the law, and the legislative branch can go away.
I'm afraid I got to get to a break. I knew you two would get back to your normal sparring selves. Thanks, gang, so much for being here. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon, and we'll wrap things up for Flashpoint right after this.
1 in 5 Americans are affected by mental health disorders. Don't let stigma cause you or your loved one to suffer in silence. Contact the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network Access Center helpline today. Our trained clinicians will conduct an intake screening and connect you with providers that can help you. DWIHN. Here to talk, here to help. 24/7. Call 800-241-4949.
We're excited to announce your personal car buying experience, which allows you to shop fast, shop smart, shop safe. Upon visiting our virtual showroom, you can request your own virtual car buying assistant. Your assistant will deliver a virtual or remote test drive, arrange your finance or lease options, complete your trade appraisal, and digitally finalize your financial documents. Your deal, your way, made easy. Request your virtual buying assistant today.
Moms are protectors, fixers, and even teachers. Moms are the magic. For the moms who can't be with their moms or who can't be with their kids. For the moms who are brave and generous and the ones who fiercely support each other. Your love is powerful, and your love keeps so many of us going. Thank you. We hope you find a special moment just for you. Happy Mother's Day from Local 4 and Click on Detroit.
And just like that, we're all out of time. Meet the Press coming up next. Have a great week. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time for Flashpoint.